With about $43 million in cap space, how can Utah work this to their advantage? We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On NHL in Utah.
You are Locked On NHL in Utah, your daily podcast on all things hockey in Utah, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Locked On NHL in Utah. I'm your host, Robyn Leonio, alongside Tom Callahan. We're continuing this week, getting you guys all ready for the upcoming season. This off-season, the very first off-season for you new Utah hockey fans. So we'll make sure you guys know everything you need to know about the team. And Tom, this is something that we kind of talked, that you and I talked off mic last night when we were trying to get ready for recording and say, hey, let's talk about the cap space, because you looked at cap friendly, $43 million just about in salary cap space, by far the most amount of any other NHL team.
Let's go shopping.
Oh, yes.
Let's go shopping.
They could take their pick. They really can. They could really do whatever they can, and they're going to use that to their advantage. We've already seen Bill Armstrong do that with not $43 million in cap space, with less than that, but still a lot of cap space. We know he does that, and it's worked in the past. Exactly how they do it, is it going to be different from when they did what they did in Arizona, or it's going to be a little more of the same?
Listen to how nice. If you're a Utah fan, Robyn, this is a tremendous offseason for you. You're licking your chops and you're just hoping that your GM makes the right signings, because not only do you have $43.264 million worth of cap space, but listen to your draft picks. These are also capital. You've got your first rounder. You've got 3 in the second round. You've got your own. You've got Florida's. And you also have the Capitals. In round 3, you've got your own and the Avalanche and the Oilers. So you've got 3 in round 2, 3 in round 3, 2 in round 4, 1 of your own, 1 of the Sharks. And then round 5, Utah has its own pick. Round 6, they have 2, their own and Dallas's pick. And then, of course, a 7th rounder. So I'll tell you what, right there, I mean, you're looking at a very exciting setup. Now, we talked about it the other night. There are no defensemen signed right now. Now, here's the upside of that. And we didn't really touch on this, and I hope we didn't cause a panic in the fan base here, but 3 of those guys are RFA. So, you've got Dursey, Moser, and Valimaki, who are RFAs. That means there's some team control with a restricted contract. The UFAs are Brown and Dermott, but you still have nobody signed. Now, expect that you will start to bring a couple of those RFAs back. Barrett Hayton up front is an RFA. He is the only other RFA that they've got. So really just those 4 to deal with, 3 on the defensive side. Once they get that done, they have their goaltending set. They have Amelka for another year. They have 2 more years with Connor Ingram, the Masterton Trophy winner. They're both in at reasonable amounts, 2.725 for Amelka, and then 1.95 for Ingram. Perfect, reasonable, inexpensive. You're getting good goaltending out of those guys for the price. So I'm totally happy with that. You have dead cap space, LTIR for Shea Weber to the tune of $7.85 million. So that is there. You can bury that contract, and that's one of the things that they have to be able to go shopping. So all of these things, Robyn, that we just talked about are big reasons to be excited as a Utah fan coming into the offseason. There could be serious fireworks.
Oh, and it really has the implications of how good this team can be next year and in the next couple of years. You focus on those, and if you can focus on getting team-friendly contracts, that not only will help them for this year, but also next few years, in addition to still allowing them to use those assets to their advantage. You mentioned the draft picks. What can Bill Armstrong do to either, maybe pick up either another actual player, or just continue to add to your draft capital, because that's what their goal has been about during the early stages of the rebuild, is rebuild through the draft. Get more players to the draft, you have a higher chance that these guys are going to be great, better, high-end talent.
Absolutely. And just taking a look at getting ready for free agency in July here, there's right now 611 guys. Now, not all 611 are going to make it to the market. Some will sign before July 1. They'll stay with their teams. A couple guys might get dealt at the draft. And so really the wheels in motion as we start to figure out how to weaponize this 43 million. You could take it out for a spin by dropping a bomb in free agency, trying to land a big name player, but the work, it starts before that, and it starts at the draft, because you have all those picks, and you have some in early rounds, and you have, like I say, two in the third, three in the third, pardon me, and three in the second. Get my numbers right. That's a lot of picks that some GMs value more than others. Some guys may be wanting to bump up to grab a guy in the second round. Utah's got the ability to make that move, then be able to bounce some guys through the franchise, retain 25% of a salary here and there, get another draft pick back in, get a little bit of help from that. And that's where some of those draft picks come from, is Utah's ability to help with that. But the other thing is, and fans may not know this, but it is worth noting that there are times when a franchise may trade for the rights to a pending UFA in order to have what amounts to an exclusive negotiating window with that player. So let's say, I'm just going to throw this out there, Steven Stamkos, biggest name in free agency, goes to Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
They talk. It's clear they're not going to come to a deal. Stamkos says, you know what, guys, I'm going to test the market. It's just not going to happen for me. I've got a list of teams I want to talk to. If one of those teams happens to be a Utah, let's say, what they might do is trade a draft pick or even cash considerations for Stamkos, maybe up to a week ahead of that free agency deadline, or around the draft. So they then have his rights up until July 1st, and they can negotiate with him exclusively to extend. Now, why is that important, Robyn? You may ask, and I knew you were going to ask, so I just went ahead and asked. The reason that's important is because now, when it's your player, 8-year contract. When it's not your player, free agency, 7-year contract. There is a big deal. Now, I'm not saying you want to sign a 34-year-old Stamkos to an 8-year deal. However, some of the younger guys out there, you might consider dropping that extra year on them to get the deal done. And so that's a potential for the Utah franchise as well.
Taking a look at that, and you mentioned that pretty perfectly, is being able to trade for the rights, I think, is huge. If you find a player like that, and again, Stamkos was it was just an example out there, as you mentioned, because the chance of him even making it to free agency are pretty low. And that's, as you mentioned, 8 years for him would be a lot. But there are so many players you can do that for. In this upcoming year, especially, I think I took a look through most of the NHL. I'm trying to remember all of the names, but there's a lot of, pretty big name guys that are still in their, relatively in their prime, late 20s, who are ready for their next big deal. But their team might not be able to afford a contract of what they're expecting.
So take a look at Florida, for example, and Sam Reinhart is a good name that pops up here. Not that Florida doesn't love Sam Reinhart, not that they don't want him back. They sure do. 94 points. Why wouldn't you want that guy back? But if you bring Reinhart back and you have to give him a longer-term deal, he's 28. So let's say you want to wrap him up. And Robyn, I've told you a bunch of times, I'm not a fan of buying years on a guy in his mid to late 30s. I don't like that. But if you have to do it to get the productive years out of Reinhart, maybe you go 6 years, maybe you do go to 7, takes him up to 35, to wrap that guy up. You're going to spend money to do it. So now Florida, which wants to keep its core intact, that has run it so far to the conference final, someone else may fall off the ship. You can't keep everybody year to year. So Florida then, by keeping Reinhart, spending a little extra, again, we talk about that cap space and being able to weaponize that cap space. That's Utah has all of that cash in its hip pocket and the ability to entice a player. You don't want to overpay. You don't want to overpay for a guy. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I'm not saying to splash out just for, like a fourth liner, but you have the ability to, when it comes down to a team that can't offer more than 800,000 and you can offer 900, that's a difference. 1.5 versus 1.8, that's a difference, even 6.5 versus 7. That is a difference to these guys, real tangible difference that a team like Utah can go above and beyond and offer, and a team like Florida trying to keep guys together might not be able to. And some guys are going to end up walking away, and it's not that they don't want to stay with their teams, but it's a business. As much as it is a sport, it's a business.
Being able to bolster and add depth to that, to that bottom six would be huge, right? And if you're able to, and if you're able to convince those kind of players who are of that caliber, but maybe even a little bit higher, that could be mid, that could also be mid six anywhere. Like, they'll take that deal. If they can get a little bit more money at Utah, they'll take that deal.
Yeah. And you also look at the equation of, what do I want to do career-wise? Have I already won a cup, 2 or 3 cups? Am I happy with where I'm at? And now I feel I can go somewhere to build. Or are you chasing that final cup and you're like, you know what? I'm only signing with a top 4 contender, which, I mean, is impossible to predict. But some guys think, if I go to this team, it's going to make the huge difference. And some guys chase that cup their whole career and don't get it. But some guys may have won, may have established themselves, and now see a chance in Utah to do what players in Vegas and players in Seattle have recently done, and that's establish a legacy in a city, become that first fan favorite, that first team captain. Don't forget, and I mentioned the name Kyle Oposo before, who's right now getting a great chance to have a run at a cup with Florida, but he might be a guy Utah looks to bring in as a veteran presence. Wouldn't be that expensive. Coming off this deep playoff run, especially. I mean, now, does Oposo want to do that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But that kind of example is something that is also available now to Utah when you say, you know what, hey, you could be the guy to get us over the hump, because they're at the hump now. We've talked about it. They're at the hump. Let's get over it and get into that playoff spot. And I think they need to be challenging for that this year.
They are certainly in that, what I like to call the emerging period from their rebuild. And it's interesting to see, all the things they can do. And we can continue to talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even easier. Prices on Game Time app usually go down the closer get the tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, view from your seats, and lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. And it just goes beyond the NBA. You can find MLB tickets. You can find all kinds of events. So even beyond sports, comedy events, concerts, any other kinds of shows that you're looking for, Game Time has it all. And once again, you can take a look at all their features, from the views from those seats and the venue, their low price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. My favorite feature, all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON. NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's continue this conversation. And Tom, one of the things that I kind of wanted to bring up when it comes to weaponizing the cap, and it's because Utah's in a unique situation where I want to make a joke about it, because of course, when there was still the Coyotes, people would actually talk kind of a little bit low about that. It's like, hey, the Coyotes are a money laundering organization. They're finding ways to to take bad deals, and they're using it to their advantage. And we're like, well, that works in the CBA. I mean, it's the what we're calling right now, I guess, the anti-Vegas, where instead of going over the cap space and figuring out a way to spend more money with their LTIR, you got Utah, where it's well, we're going to spend as little money as possible for now.
And that's kind of part of it is, you could take on that Shea Weber deal, not put it on long-term IR, and get yourself over the floor. So if you really, and look, the rules are there. So I don't
as long
get
as it's
very,
in the CBA.
and see, that's the thing. I don't get very indignant when Vegas activates a guy, or Toronto, or whoever. You can bring guys back in the postseason. Here, number one, here's why. And folks might not know this. Players only receive paychecks during the regular season. They get 26 checks from the beginning of the season until the very last day of the regular season. In the playoffs, the players are not paid. And that's why the cap ceases to exist. In the playoffs, the only thing players play for is playoff share, which comes from the NHLPA. And of course, the further you go, the more money you're going to make. But the playoff bonus share is paid out by the Players Association. It's nothing to do with the teams. Every home game in the NHL playoffs for a team is gravy, pure profit. You open the doors, you pay your expenses, and everything left after that, you're laughing. So that's why teams love to get as many home dates as they can, because they're not having to absorb that player payroll then in the postseason. And teams can clear a couple $1 million a game, which is nothing to sneeze at when you're trying to get your franchise into the black. So I don't have a problem with it, just like I don't have a problem with the LTIR. Look, the loophole was created for a reason. It was created to, number one, not have and I feel bad bringing him up. It's like Bobby Bonilla, but Rick DiPietro contract that's hanging out there. And instead it allows teams to move otherwise untradeable contracts to get out from under it saves GMs from themselves, right? That's what it is. It saved me from myself. And so that's in there, though. That was written in. The players wanted it because now Shea Weber is loving it. He hasn't played a game in a couple of seasons, doesn't have to, still getting paid his money. And instead of taking an insurance settlement in the old days and being told to hit the road, which might only be a percentage of the contract, you just keep getting paid what you're getting paid, and you just hang out on the IR. So, yes, you're a Utah NHL player, and you're not somewhere else, but if you can't play anymore, you're still getting paid for it at the very least. So look, the loophole's there. Teams exploit it. That's fine. If you don't like it, change the CBA.
Yeah, but and here's the thing, and so everyone knows, the chance of that happening probably not going to happen, because there's so many things that happen. Like, let's take a look at the last time that there was any issues with the CBA. No one liked what happened with that.
No
one wants to see another lockout.
I remember how, we're locked on, not locked out. It's like, I remember how stunned I was when they canceled the 04-05 season. My mind was blown, but Gary Bettman took the league through a tough time and got what he wanted. And I think now we look at it, they got the cap, they negotiate about different things, and Gary Bettman does a brilliant job of making a mountain out of a molehill to favor the owners and favor the teams. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody actually really cares about whether or not players go play in the Olympics or not from a team standpoint. There's probably a couple of old school GMs and old school owners who are like, I don't want my guy breaking a leg over there. And yes, that can happen. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody cares. But Bettman made it such a big issue that the players had to fight for it. And that's one less thing they're fighting on somewhere else, because if they want Olympic participation so bad and international participation so bad, that means you have to give something back in order to achieve that ground gained on that front. And it's brilliant. I mean, people kind of dump on Gary Bettman. he's done an incredible job moving the league forward, keeping the owners together, keeping them from kind of ruining it on their own, and just really developing a model that gives economic certainty to these teams so that we don't have teams having to move constantly. Arizona was a little bit of a different setup, but I mean, it was just bad luck, bad timing, bad business decisions, a couple of bad
Yeah.
ownership groups. All that adds up, right? So now you're at Arizona, you're on to Utah. But now you have what appears to be at first blush great ownership, supportive community. Of course, the tickets, it's nice that they have such a giant waiting list for tickets. Now let's see where the corporate dollars come from. And if the businesses in town are willing to step up in and around the Salt Lake area, that's going to be another key to supporting this franchise. There's an awful lot of ducks that need to be aligned here. But again, credit to Bettman for putting the league in a spot where now when the cap doesn't go up, we gripe about it. But guess who, to work it all back around to weaponizing $43 million, is in the catbird seat? It's Utah.
And they're going to take, and they're surely going to take advantage of that, which is, again, Ed, we'll go back to what we said in that first segment. If you are a Utah hockey fan, you have all the reason to be so excited now that you know that it's a sandbox for you guys. Like there's nothing I feel like that's completely out of the question what this team is capable of doing this offseason.
And so let's talk about a couple of different areas. You have a blank canvas essentially for defense.
Yep.
Goaltending, you have two very reasonable goaltenders. However, you could still make a splash even with a goaltender because you have two very tradable goaltenders. Vemelka's got 1 year left at a decent amount of money. He's shown he can play in the league, play well. Ingram, obviously the injury situation was difficult, but has shown that he can come back. And now that he actually has put some time in, looks like he's developing into something really solid. You've got him at a very low price for the next 2 years. Could you spend $4 million on a goalie? Absolutely, you could. You could spend $5 million. Wouldn't spend more than that. I don't know if I go above 4.5, but there will be names out there. There'll be guys available. Some goaltenders will look at the situation at the end of the year with their teams and go, you know what, maybe this isn't the best spot for me. There's always those goaltenders who, we've heard rumblings. Not that I'm saying go get Elvis Merzlikins. I don't think he's the right guy for Utah, but he is eminently tradable. And it's funny, the Buffalo Sabres are recently now talking about how they may not bring Devin Levi up next year again. They may put him back in Rochester. They had a nice little playoff run with the Amherst. So Buffalo may be in the market for a veteran free agent. I know Jack Campbell's going to come available, and Campbell's not the answer for any team that needs a starter, but he could be a good 1B option for a team like Utah, for a team like Buffalo, if they're going to go with, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Don't forget Boston. Pretty much now looks like Jeremy Swayman is the guy. Does Linus Ullmark decide to leave or ask out? That's another situation to keep an eye on, and he could be a legitimate starter for a team somewhere. So there's always something unfolding. That's just one example. You could do the same thing. You could, just rattle the chains of the forwards. Again, the defensemen, you've got a blank slate. I mean, there's an awful lot of play here. You have a nice full cupboard when it comes to both prospects and picks, and you've got cap space. I really do feel like this is the season. And you know what? This is on Armstrong right now to have the best summer he's ever had, because the door is wide open and the opportunity is there. And if he can come out and make the right moves right now, he could easily set this Utah franchise up to just go flying out of the blocks.
Which is, I think we've already seen Armstrong with the setup, right? You've seen what he's capable of doing in Arizona with the limited resources already, knowing the situation that Arizona was going through, and still doing what he's done and made a pretty close to, bubble team last year, which, if you look at the first half of the season for the Arizona Coyotes last year, they really had an impressive season. And if it weren't for that whatever it was 17 game losing streak, like going into the right before and after All-Star break. That team still looked pretty good, despite still being incredibly young, because Bill Armstrong and, obviously, of course, Coach Andre Tourigny knew what they were doing. And Bill Armstrong, again, has to set that. He's been setting it up all along, and he's going to continue to do that. The question is, will he, what do we know now? Is he going to have a little bit more of slack, a little bit more free range with it under a different ownership?
Yeah, well, and that's it. That's something we haven't discussed, but I think is a good final point when you talk about weaponizing the space is how much of it are you allowed to spend? Each team has two budgets. Everybody would love to spend to the cap, and so the max of your budget is the max of the cap. That's the external budget. The internal budget is always a few million different. No matter what anybody tells you, even what you hear in the press. Let's say, let's just go ahead and say that Utah is given the blessing to spend up to the cap. Okay, by ownership, and they're like, you know what? If it makes sense, spend the money. So just because you have that ability doesn't mean that you want to spend more than 75 million, because you need to allow yourself for 70 million. You need to allow yourself, well, of course, you got to get to the floor, but you got to allow yourself that flexibility and the ability to figure out what you want to spend, what you want to have available early season. Maybe not a ton of moves, but maybe one or two.
Yeah.
There might be a Patrick Kane hanging out there who doesn't start the year with a club and then signs on later, and you kind of figure out where guys are going. Sometimes that happens, and then teams get off to a 5-15 start. Maybe you want to fire a coach, but might make a trade to shake things up. And then, of course, then you're into February, and now you're heading towards the deadline, so you can have the flexibility there. And if you're hanging around that number 8 spot, it gives you a lot of different ways to play it. Do you have to have success in year 1 in Utah for the fans and for the sponsors? No. Would it be nice? Yes. But you don't have to, because that's your honeymoon year. And you could say, we'll get them next year. So that flexibility is there as well. It's a really wonderful time for Utah to build and to be able to grow. And I can't wait to see how they shape it for the future.
And the good thing is that and there's something we talked about last week, right? Where the team will still have a little bit more expectation. They won't have like the lower expectation of an expansion franchise like Vegas and Seattle did when they first came in. Of course, we talked how Vegas completely outblew those expectations, way far and beyond. Just a bunch of misfits somehow making it to the Stanley Cup final year 1. But that's, again, this is a whole different situation where this Utah team is already established. We already know the core. We already know it's all about defined, a little bit more. I wouldn't say fine tuning, because I would say just, I guess, general tuning. There's some tune-ups that still need to be done for this team to be a competitive team. And as we've said all episode long and throughout last week, is Bill Armstrong has the capability to do it. And I want to go to that point where you mentioned that you don't want to kind of get too eager to kind of spend up to the cap if you're told you're able to. We've seen teams do that. Getting into cap hell this early is not the fun thing you want. That's actually that.
Yeah, just because you can spend doesn't mean you should. We've seen a bunch of teams do that. The Sabres did that not too long ago, and then they had to unload a bunch of those guys. You do see that. And Robyn, that's, again, this is where your GM is so important, right? I mean, this all falls on Bill Armstrong to put this together in the right way, making the right judgment calls at the right time. Not only knowing when to spend the money, which is hard enough, but knowing when to walk away from a deal that just doesn't make sense.
Which is going to be interesting because, we know, again, only from this last season, but in previous seasons, and any kind of bit that he had with the St. Louis Blues, because he was under GM Doug Armstrong, no relation, by the way, if you are newer hockey fan, Doug Armstrong, GM of the St. Louis Blues, Bill Armstrong, who was like his like assistant at the time, no relation. It's the very same reason who is it? His name is Chris Armstrong, who's the now president of hockey ops for Utah. Also no relation. I don't know why this keeps happening. What's with this, Tom?
I don't know. I'm going to change my name to Tom Armstrong and see if it gets me a front office position. We'll see.
We'll see. Let's kind of move on from this, unless you have any thoughts, because I do want to ask some questions you have about the conference finals.
No, I mean that's a good one, and then the other one too. Why don't we transition with this nugget? It should be confirmed by the time folks are seeing this podcast, but it looks like Disco Dan Bilesma, new head coach of the Seattle Kraken. So that should be confirmed by the time this is getting in front of eyes and ears.
So definitely good to hear from that first. We're hearing it on Locked On NHL in Utah. What a great place. Let's spend the last, let's see, maybe about just 5 minutes. We don't have a lot of time, but anything you're noticing, Tom, from the conference finals? We're in the middle of the conference finals right now for the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think we've each been about three games in for both of the series. What are you taking away from this series so far? Maybe what are some things that, kind of based on what we talked about today, that Utah can learn from, that these teams have made so successful?
I think so. One of the things, I'm a big defense wins championships guy. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean goaltending. And I think teams have won recently with very average goaltending. Chicago, I think Niemi, Crawford, average goaltenders won a Stanley Cup because Chicago was so good in front of them. Philip Grubauer, average goaltender who won a Stanley Cup and got paid in free agency, $8 million to go free agent to Seattle. Now, mind you, they had to spend the money, but Grubauer was a product of the Avalanche in front of him. Puck possession, dominating offensively, time of possession. Grubauer barely faced any shots. And so it looks good.
Adin Hill with Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. Adin Hill in Vegas. Well, it looks good when the team in front of you is able to do that for you. And so now you look at the Oilers, and everybody said, well, they have a goaltending problem. They have a goaltending problem. It's funny how the goaltending problem goes away when the Oilers are playing puck possession hockey, when the Oilers are, dominating those other teams. But on nights when they're not, then their goaltending gets exposed. You can win with average goaltending in the NHL. You just have to have the puck in the other end of the ice a lot, and you have to hang on to it and cycle and figure out ways to win. So there's a blueprint there with Edmonton. Dallas, the blueprint is depth. Excellent goaltending. Jake Ottinger is one of the best in the NHL. There's no doubting that Dallas has a solid young core of very talented players with a couple of, veteran leaders up front who are having just, again, good years, being just positive contributors. So there's a little bit of a mix, old and young. Again, the solid goaltending, that's a different blueprint. Florida, if they don't beat you on the ice, they'll beat you in the alley. They are a rough and tough team. They're able to run you over, and they could be intimidating. I think the Rangers have done a nice job handling them. But again, they have a goaltender who's good. He's not the best goaltender left right now. I think he's third out of the four that are left. But I like Bobrovsky because I feel like he's got a little bit of that old Grant Fuhr in him where he'll give up the fifth, but he will not give up the sixth, and you can win 6-5. That's what Florida is right now. And Florida just beats you until you give up shots, you give up rebounds, you start looking over your shoulder because you're going to get run into. And then the Rangers blueprint is superstars, right? I mean, the Rangers have all the name recognition. The Rangers have, the hot defensemen. They have the hot forwards. They've got, the Panarins, the Shesterkins, the Adam Foxes, Zibanejad, all these guys. Chris Kreider has shown back up again. Boy, what a great find he was for the Rangers. They just have the names that come at you. And so that's four different blueprints on how to win. So you can win in any way you want. But for me, if you limit the chances on your goal, whether through offensive zone time, generating off the cycle, not off the rush, you can generate off the rush. That's fine. It means you have speed and depth on the wings. But that's not your blueprint to success. To hang on to the puck in the offensive zone, to be able to clean up in front of your own net, take care of your goaltending, at the end of the day, that's going to win you a championship.
And that's and that's a thing that people should be reminded of. And you mentioned it perfectly, how there is no one way. Right? It's there are, you can have multiple different makeups, and I think the Utah team can be a very unique one. It can be, you can have some of the elements that we've seen from each of these four teams, but again, they kind of still have to match up to some of the elements that you mentioned.
I'd love to see Utah bring in a good 1C, a strong first line center, and then allow the ability to kind of let Lawson Krause go to the second line, where I think he'd be very effective top six forward, and that's no slight against Lawson Krause. I really like him as a player. But just to be able to and then move Schmaltz to wing, as we talked about last time, that to me would be fantastic. And you look at every one of these four teams has a definite 1C, a first line center who is a player who can take over a game. And I think that is so important. Yes, you need a good top four, not top six and D. No, you need a good top four. Your 1-2 pairing has to be shut down, and they have to be excellent at it. Your 3-4 is going to be your second power play unit, and they're going to generate some offense for you. But if you don't have the depth down the middle, and I think that's where Utah can really grow and blossom this offseason, is in those two positions. Again, you can make it through an entire year with Vejmelka and Ingram and not bat an eye.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of people have been pretty comfortable with them as well. It's like, yeah, they don't really have any glaring issues. Anyways, any final thoughts before we close things off?
I think it's been excellent. It's been two different series in the conference finals. It's fun watching these two teams go at it. Dallas and Edmonton are night and day. Rangers, Florida really has been just an intense matchup. It's a lot of fun. This is a great time of year to watch hockey. And as soon as we're done with this, we're going to be right into the draft. And then before you know it, free agency. And suddenly we're going to be talking about training camp. So I love it.
Time rolls pretty quickly. This off season always feels way too short, especially for everything that happens. But we'll be your go-to source, Utah hockey fans, to tune into us. We'll get you ready for the draft. We'll get you ready for free agency, for prospect camp, training camp. Any things you guys need to know for this NHL and Utah Club, we got you covered right here on Locked On NHL in Utah. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to leave a review, to leave a comment, subscribe if you've yet to already. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube, Sirius XM. Listen to us ad-free on Amazon Music. Don't forget to interact with us on social media. We are on the app formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, at LO_NHL Utah. I am at Robyn_Leonio. Tom Callahan is at Callahan on Air. Interact with us. Ask us a question. We might answer right back or on a future episode of the Locked On NHL in Utah podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. We'll see you next time.